an early Christmas present for everyone. We're going to go full Miss Cleo, look into our crystal quarterback ball. Look that reference up. It's from the 80s. You'll love it. And to trust or not to trust Harbaugh and everybody, really, that is the question. We've got all that and more. I'm Jason Fitz, and it is time for Inside Coverage. Welcome to Inside Coverage, part of the Zero Blitz family, where we dive into the why and how of all things NFL. Jori, Epstein, Charles Robinson. I'm going to learn to speak. Jason Fitz. We're going to be hanging out with you. We got a lot to get to. First and foremost, though, I got to ask, Jori, you were just in Orlando, the owners' meeting. Before we get to anything, how was Orlando? Did you have fun?
Orlando was great. Yes, definitely fun. It's also just insane because it's like, the GMs and coaches don't leave the bar till 2 a.m. But, oh, by the way, they all have this breakfast that we have to be at 7:30 in the morning. And it is not one for people who want sleep. But it was good. It was good to get a little bit of warmth. And it's definitely just such a productive week because so many people are in the same place at the same time.
So we're no theme park hopping is what you're telling me? It's all straight from meetings to the bar to the meetings to the bar. Like that's rough.
I had some people, like some of my friends went to Disney yesterday. I was more like post up in the lobby. This is my like go-to move. Find a lobby spot where everyone has to walk by. So this time it was perfect because there was like a three-way nexus of like the front door, the elevators to the room, and the entrance from the conference center. And I just worked there for like 8 to 10 hours a day, which was funny at one point on Monday night. I won't get into all the details, but let's just say there are a lot of high-ranking people who same position who seem to have like a group text and all descend on the same place at once. And I'm like, I feel like I'm not supposed to be here, but you're having this meeting in the lobby, so I'm not leaving.
And while we're celebrating wonderful times, C-Rob, you are wearing a Tigers hat, so happy opening day. I just had to acknowledge you always have a little Detroit love. Happy opening day. May this be a year of prosperity and tremendous baseball for you. I can't say it with a straight face, but I can hope for you, brother.
Hey, we're all right. Listen, the 100 lost seasons, I think, are behind us. We're turning in the right direction. So it's
that's
this is
the spirit.
Yeah, the first few weeks are the hopeful season, and then after that, it kind of goes south. But
that's all we can do. All right, so let's get to the owners' meeting. A lot of rule changes, and obviously the kickoff rule. I'll tell y'all, like that's something I'm pretty familiar with. I covered the XFL at ESPN, so I've seen the kickoff in action quite a bit. I didn't have any problem with the rule. I actually thought it was a pretty entertaining process for the kickoff at the XFL, so I'm kind of glad the NFL brought it. Are either of you surprised? Here, I'll start with you. Are you surprised at all that is the formulation of the way that they're going to do kickoffs at this point?
It takes the heavy collisions out of the game, right? That's really what they wanted, but they didn't want to remove the play. One thing that occurred that I think really turned the corner here was when we went through a Super Bowl and there wasn't a single kick returned, right? And it's just hard to be on the biggest stage and completely remove what truly is a very exciting play out of the game. And the league office had already been chirping about it leading into that. Troy Vincent had been saying repeatedly, just calling it like a ceremonial play in a very negative tone. So you knew where they were leaning. And I think it was just coming up with a formula that left everybody on the field, was a little bit creative, and removed these big time collisions, which is what essentially the XFL formula with some tweaks does. And another thing, though, that was really important in it is if you kick it through the end zone, the team's getting it at the 30. Like that is such an unappealing outcome for a team kicking it through the end zone, because you're basically saying if your opponent has a really good kicker, they may only need to go 40, maybe 45 yards to be in scoring position. There's no team that's going to want to just automatically give that up. Instead, what they're going to do is they're going to try and be creative and figure out how to defend it. That, to me, has been the interesting thing is post the rule passing is sort of hearing the conversations from whether it's front office people or coaches, just how they're going to go to work and they're going to start to ratchet on this setup and figure out what can they do creatively to get an edge. It's probably a little overblown, this idea that it's going to massively change rosters. We'll see. We'll see if that happens in terms of certain individuals that are retained specifically for these roster spots. I did have a GM who said to me, I wish that we could have 2 extra, like instead of a 53-man roster, have a 55-man roster, and then add 2 extra actives on game day. He said, because then that would allow us to have essentially 2 personnel that are specifically slated for special teams now. And he said, you do feel like this is going to create a pinch again when it comes to cut down day, because you have special teams coaches who are going, you're going to go to the DN's position and go, hey, I need you to keep these guys because we need them on the kickoff team. And the DN's coach is going to go, well, these guys suck. Like in terms of like being in the regular rotation, I can't roster these guys. I need guys that I know can be competitive and on the field and rotating into games. I'm not keeping guys just for special teams purposes. And that won't be the only position that I think will be affected by it. So I'll be curious to see as things move forward, whether there does become pressure to add maybe one additional spot to the roster down the line, specifically to try and retain some of the special teams, depth that now has to play again. Because think about it, you didn't need to have special teams depth anymore, at least as far as kickoffs were concerned, because they had taken it out of the game. So when the rosters were finalized last season, you didn't have to sit there and go, okay, well, let's talk about kickoff coverage. We have to make sure that we have this guy and this guy and this guy on our roster, even though we probably wouldn't keep them if they didn't have value on the kickoff team. They just didn't keep them. They said, screw it, we're going to kick it through the end zone every time. So we don't have to worry about it. Well, now they have to worry about it. So that'll be the thing that I think is going to be interesting in terms of, how that shapes up and what teams do to kind of get that edge. We're going to find out pretty fast, who the super creative special teams coaches are.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about the whole, do you really want it at the 30 if you kick it through? The other really fascinating part is that if the ball is kicked into the landing zone, which is what they're calling the 0 to 20, you have to return it. Like you can't return it. And so I think this is one of those rare situations where the league had an opportunity to make the game more exciting, increase the amount of offense, increase the amount of points, which they do expect it to impact points because they expect it to impact field position, and then still in theory have it be a safer play. I do think that is a factor, and I don't think it's the only factor. I also think it would probably be fair to be like the league kind of has like 1 or 2 things every year that they're like, this is what we're doing about safety so that we don't have to do anything about grass versus turf. But I do think that the whole idea is, instead of having people run and then hit each other when they have all the speed, which force equals mass times acceleration. So we're removing some of the acceleration and thus removing some of the force, then they're just going to be there. The other thing that's interesting is that this isn't actually like a new thing for players, because as John Fossil, the Cowboys special teams coach, was one of the 2 special teams coordinators really pushing this rule change. He and the Saints coach, Anthony Rizzo, were really the spearheaders. And he was like, look, we already practice this. Like, because you don't want to hit your own guys and hurt your own guys in practice, it's essentially, imagine if you were running, and then you just stopped and then you did the play. So they just take out the running in practice. So this will actually be a little more natural to the players playing special teams. As it relates to the roster, I don't think this is going to impact the top end of the roster. I do think it is going to impact the bottom end of the roster and who makes the difference in those last 4 or 5 spots, because a lot of coaches will tell you if the guy is not a superstar or he hasn't yet proven himself, you want every player on your roster to do 2 things. Now, that could be 2 things on offense, like receiving and blocking, or it could be stopping the run and maybe being a blitz or whatever. But special teams is one of those 2 things for a lot of those younger guys. And so I do think that that's one of the reasons that there's really impetus to get this done this week rather than in May, because teams figuring out their 5th, 6th, 7th round picks in the draft next month, or it's still March. I never know what time or day or week or month it is. They're going to want to encounter this. Again, I don't think it's totally going to change the draft, but do I think a late round pick when you already have 2 guys you like, this could be the deciding factor? I do.
I just think the asinine part of all of it is if they didn't do anything about the onside kick. So now you have to tell anybody when you want to attempt an onside kick, which takes a play that's already virtually impossible and makes it even more impossible. If you're going to make people go through a rule change, rip off the Band-Aid and get it all right at once. If you're going to implement that portion of essentially the XFL rule, then also take their onside kick process of converting a 4th and 15, make it a 4th and 20, whatever you want. Like, have a way to implement and change the onside kick, because That play's already a stupid waste of all of our time. It's even going to get more stupid and more of a waste of our time if you have to announce to the world, hey guys, we're doing an onside kick. Like, you've taken away the one time that play can actually work with some level of higher percentage. And so that's the not well thought out portion of it. To me, I would be stunned if this sticks and this is the new rule, if they don't turn around and change that.
Don't you think too, though, that maybe a disguised element of all of this is that they don't want the onside kick in football anymore anyway, because that still is a high impact play. It's still a play where there are vulnerable players, and in a short, you have a short area of field, but there are high collisions still on the onside kick. And maybe they're already saying, look, so few of these are converted anyway at this point. Why do we even have people going through what is effectively not a play that's working, and yet we're still adding collisions into the game? We'll just sacrifice that, and we're going to put in 1,900, 2,000 kickoffs back into a season by sacrificing a play that, we don't really like that much anyway, because it has a low success rate, but still, as Jori puts it, a high level of force still used
collision,
in a short
mass,
area.
like the physics lesson.
E equals MC squared. We got lots of options.
I definitely was working at the student newspaper that day.
But Fitz, what I think is interesting about what you said is, like, I'm not a big politics person, so I'm not getting political here. But when you think about the way things get passed through Congress, a lot of times there's like a package that they're trying to pass through. And it's sort of like, what give and take do you have to have? If you add this, is this going to not is the other party going to say, like, I'm not going for that? Or if you take it out, like, where are you willing to compromise? And the biggest issue with passing this rule is that I believe as of Monday nights, this rule ultimately passed Tuesday. And as of Monday night, they were 5 votes short of the 24 out of 32 that they needed to. And the way they described the dissenters was there are traditionalists who don't want to change the game. And so if you try and change all of this at once, you might not get those 5 votes. If you're like, hey, we'll do this one this year. And then when you guys realize it's not the end of the world to modernize the game, especially in ways that make it more exciting, in some ways more of a football play, then maybe next year we get the next part. So I kind of get what they're doing.
That's why you guys are smart. Well, since you guys are being smart, I do want to get your thoughts on one thing that was big to me. And not just like, I'm going to step away from just being a football fan for a second. The NFL's decision to announce that they're playing games on Christmas Day is not shocking at all. But it is the ultimate up yours to the NBA. Like, the NBA has owned that day for years. And now the NFL's like, you know what? We're taking that. Like, was there in what you guys have figured, was there any thought to the other leagues? Does the NFL care about anything?
No.
Okay.
No, come on.
The only way they might care about the other leagues is to show them and own them that, like, we'll still get more people and more viewers by far than you guys.
I just wanted to be in Adam Silver's, whatever room Adam Silver was in when Roger Goodell was giving the press conference, and someone asked him about playing football on Wednesdays, and Goodell's basically like, well, we won't play football on Wednesdays when it's not on Christmas. like this is like a total, they just do not give a like, they will eat your lunch over and over and over again.
Can.
Yeah, and they can, and you can complain about it, and we can replay the Mark Cuban pigs get slaughtered quote over and over again. Well, Cuban, he sold his team majority anyway. Like, until something changes and people stop watching the NFL, they're gonna program it every single day.
I feel like, again, I'll say what Jori said. I don't want to be political, but I got a buddy that always said whenever they raise taxes locally, like, they never just turn around and lower those local taxes. Like, nobody comes in and says, hey, we're getting a bunch of money from you locally, we're going to give you back a bunch. Like, that's very rare to happen. The NFL is the same way. Once they take a day, they're not giving it back.
Right,
like, once they took Christmas Day, they're like, no, this Christmas Day looks good on us. Like, and if I'm the NBA, I'm looking around thinking that was our flagship day. Like, the NBA wastes the first 6 weeks of their season while nobody's paying attention to get to Christmas Day. And that's their big opening party. And now that is just absolutely host. Good on the NFL, though. I mean.
And Roger Goodell would tell you, first of all, the teams that play on that Wednesday of Christmas are going to play on Saturday rather than Sunday the weekend before. And he insists, like, they're not data points that show that there's more injuries in Thursday night football. I don't know if I agree with him on that, but he absolutely said it on the record the other day. So those are two of the things that they sort of contextualize that decision with.
While you're contextualizing, real quick, before we continue to move through things, you were there, Jori, and I just need you to break down I know you're not necessarily scouring social media with this, but like, what was on Jerry Jones' notebook? Like, what's he scribbling about? like everybody's zooming in on it, and it's just those squiggles. Like, why have the notebook if he's just squiggling? What is he doing?
Can I just tell you, it's actually pretty cathartic to see that go viral, because I'm part of this conversation going on with Jerry Jones, and basically, like, I walk up to them, they're sort of in this hallway. There was outside meeting rooms between the JW and the Ritz where the conference was going on. And Jerry's just sitting there, and I'm talking to him with one other reporter, and then a Dallas reporter walks up, a couple more. We talked to him for like 20 minutes, but it's like seemingly all off the record, so no one's recording. And then he's like, hold on, I'll be right back. You guys can imagine why he had to be right back. And he's like, wait right here. He comes back and does 43 more minutes on the record. And he's just going in circles saying everything in its opposite. While this is happening, he's got his pen and his NFL watermarked notepad, and he's being like, and I hope we have this part on video, and Dak, and Micah, and CD. And the whole time he's just drawing lines and circles, like as if they punctuate his point. Like there was nothing but lines and circles. The only thing that kind of had a relevance to what he was saying is he was describing the peaks and valleys of the salary cap, is how he said it. And he drew a roller coaster type shape, which, by the way, the salary cap goes up and to the right. It's not peaks and valleys. That's another story. But the best part, and then I'll stop going on about this, he did this on 4 different notebook pages throughout our conversation. This was not just like he's mindlessly doodling.
Yeah, that's what I
noticed. He would do lines and circles, and then he would turn the page and do it again. And during our conversation, 4 pages were taking up with these lines and circles. And I've actually asked a couple other like execs and agents and even a coach, like, have you seen him do this? And they're like, oh, absolutely, we have. And he was telling us some story about going to the bank and then being like, you can read your handwriting. And then he like turns back to one of the pre-scribbled pages to show like he can read that. And I'm like, Jerry, that's not handwriting. That is lines and circles.
I would have absolutely treated it like a Jackson Pollock moment and been like, can you sign that? And can I have it?
There was so much, like, I was just like so enamored by it, especially because he was talking for so long that like I like to do 2 things at once, as we know. So yeah, I was like just processing it for hours. Like the 4 pages part, I could not get over. I don't think I'm over it still.
You could have framed all 4 up and then just called it The Mind of Jerry Jones. And it's art.
Yeah.
But like, I'll pose this to you guys sensitively, right? Because I never want to make any weird accusations here. But to your point, he spent a long time talking in circles, right? And he's drawing on notebooks in ways that make no sense. Like when fans look at that and they're like, man, Jerry just feels like he's not all there. Like he's losing it. Like, Jori, you've been around Jerry for a long time. Is Jerry as, let's say, cognizant today as he was a few years ago? Like, is there a Jerry issue, or is this just Jerry being Jerry?
Look, Jerry wasn't pointing to the lines and being like, do you see what I mean? This is my plan for the salary cap. Like, that's how people were doing it. So it was more like the way I took it, and the way someone in the organization also agreed with me that this was accurate, is some people have hand gestures of like this and that, and like Dak and CD, his hand gestures were via pen. Like it was his punctuating the points. So he's not going crazy. Now, does he talk longer? And as most people his age, does he ramble a little bit more and go in circles? For sure. But I don't think that the paper was representative of an age thing. If anything, some people were telling me he's been doing this for years.
Come on, we watched this guy dump how many ounces of salt onto like a sausage McMuffin,
right? Yes.
Or whatever it was. I'm like, he's done weird stuff before where we're like, what the hell is going on? So I'm sure,
but you know how
to me,
it is, Rob. Like sometimes you walk into Thanksgiving and you're like, man, I don't know, Grandpa's not necessarily the same grandpa. Like I'm being very sensitive here, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. But I mean, in this particular case, is he just scribbling as a means of focusing, his thoughts? I mean, so I used to chew pens and it was always when I was, stressed out about something or really hyper focused on something. I used to chew the living hell out of pen caps. It's disgusting. And it probably makes me look like a freakazoid when you're walking around with a pen with a chewed up cap. It's really gross. And I thank God broke that habit, but I wouldn't read too much into this. I think.
Also, didn't y'all doodle in school? Like somewhere in the margins, didn't you write or draw something?
When I was bored, for sure. I mean,
no, I was never a doodler. I just wasn't a doodler. Like I couldn't even color in the lines. Like when I had to do art projects, I can't even I'm
Jerry
lost
was
on
coloring the lines, not in the lines.
All right. Obviously, we could spend the whole show going over stuff in Orlando, but there were some significant things that came out in Orlando about quarterbacks, and particularly as we look at the NFL draft, we need to take a look at J.J. McCarthy, because J.J. McCarthy conversation is everywhere. When we come back, we'll look into the crystal ball on J.J. and several other quarterbacks and see what the future might hold. So, Jori, you're too young to remember this. I'm really going to C-Rob. C-Rob, do you remember Miss Cleo? Like, he started this whole thing with the D's. Like, Miss Cleo, Jori, was
I don't know what these 80s you talk about are.
Right. You can go on YouTube. I don't know if you've heard of YouTube. You can go out on YouTube. You can type in Miss Cleo. I'm sure they're still there. They were these back then you could call an 800 or 900 number and you got charged for it. And it was a phone psychic. And Miss Cleo was this like Jamaican accent, very fake, very awful Jamaican, problematic Jamaican accent. And she was like, call Miss Cleo and we'll look into the crystal ball together. So that's hence the Miss Cleo. I would challenge everybody to go look at YouTube and check out some Miss Cleo.
Stone
clips.
needs to plug the audio of this into the segment just so people can hear how horribly aged those commercials are.
Who asked you to go out of town? The stupid young one or the married one?
The married one.
That's what I thought. Don't go. You hear me?
Yeah, it is a delight. So we're going to pull a full Miss Cleo here without the problematic accent. We're going to look at the crystal ball and try and figure some things out about the quarterback. But before we even do that, the catalyst for part of this conversation is J.J. McCarthy. And I've been doing these phoners just like you guys do all the time, where people are asking, like, what's going on with J.J.? What's going on with J.J.? And I don't know. And so what we have is you've got Pelissero coming in talking about the fact that there's all sorts of traction for J.J. McCarthy to go as high as number 2 to Washington. And in the same week where you got Harbaugh coming out saying he's the best quarterback in the draft, like I'm trying to figure out what we should be doing with this quarterback, C-Rob, this quarterback class, C-Rob, because it's confusing to me.
Yeah, I mean, I was on the phone basically all day yesterday trying to talk to different personnel individuals, GMs, scouts. I just wanted to know, how realistic is this at this point with J.J. McCarthy potentially being at 2? You know, you have ties to people in the Washington organization. Like, is this real? And it's funny because nothing has really changed in terms of the smattering of, or the splintering of opinions. Like, there are some people are like, this is just crazy, you know, and are rolling their eyes and like calling it ridiculous. Others who are like, hey, wait a minute. No, it's not. And I had one scout who he described it sort of the best. He was like, look, man, it's Baskin Robbins. It's like ice cream. Everybody has a different flavor, right? And some staffs are going to look for different things in a quarterback or feel comfortable projecting with quarterbacks, whereas others are going to want more tape, more film, more proof that, yes, the quarterback could do this. They want to see the quarterback did do this on film. So I would say there are a couple of things here. In terms of the people who think this could potentially be real and spelled out why, I thought there were some interesting things that they talked about. Like, one GM basically was like, look, you can't discount the fact that he went 27-1, the fact that he was on 3 teams and he started for 2 that were in the college football playoff. Like, success does matter. And another talked about he ran the offense. They gave him the offense. They told him what to do, and he did it. And for some teams, they prioritize quarterbacks who go out and do the you tell them to do. When you teach them what the scheme is, they go out and they operate in that scheme the way you want them to operate. Kyle Shanahan comes to mind, right? And there are quite a few teams operating Kyle Shanahan offenses now, a.k.a. Sean McVay offenses right now, a.k.a. the Minnesota Vikings, who want a player to come in and do the things that they, put into the scheme. So there's that. I had another who brought up the age, where he was like, he's 21. Some of these other quarterbacks that he's getting measured against, not so much now because he's scooted up to the top of the draft, but still like a Jaden Daniels. He said these are guys with double the number of starts that McCarthy has, or they've got a couple more years on him. Okay, well, what's JJ going to look like when he's 24? Like, okay, yeah, Jaden's at this level. What's JJ going to look like when he's had a couple of years to continue to grow? And, they bring up the fact that he put on more weight, that, hey, maybe at 21, physically, he's not even done. Like he could still continue to get stronger, bigger, add more bulk, arm strength can improve, all these different things. So there were a number of people who, I had another GM who said there's enough tape, like enough with the tape stuff. Like he's like, there's enough tape on J.J. McCarthy to show you what he can do on a football field. Just because he didn't do it a million times doesn't mean that he can't do it. Just watch the tape. There's you can find enough of it to know and understand what he can do. Now, the downside is, the naysayers with J.J. McCarthy are just like, look, if he could have been someone who could shoulder that offense and carry that team more, they would have put more on his plate. Obviously, the dissenters to that are like, why would they? They had something that worked. They had a formula. Like, why deviate from a formula if it works over and over and over again? They talked about when you looked at some of his film, some of the successful plays, some of the big throws, he had a high level of interception luck. Like, they were balls that very easily could have been tipped, or a receiver made a great play. There's one in particular, and it might have been in the Ohio State. I want to say maybe the Ohio State. There's a game where you see Roman Wilson in the end zone, climbs the ladder, the defender's in his face, and Roman Wilson jumps up over the defender and catches a touchdown pass behind the defender's head, basically falls. And that's shown as like a McCarthy highlight. There are people watching that film going,
that's a receiver bailing him out.
That's a receiver highlight. That is not a J.J. McCarthy highlight. Like, okay, he had the confidence that Roman Wilson could go and do this, but probably not a great thing to do that often. It's potentially real that he has traction at number 2. Maybe that has to do with other quarterbacks now who I think we can get to this in a little bit. I think there's red flags now across the board with these quarterbacks. I think some of it, too, could be gamesmanship. As I wrote a piece today, and remember, a year ago, leading into the week of the draft, everyone was saying Will Levis for Indianapolis Colts. It's going to happen. Like, everybody's locking Will Levis in at 4. That sure as hell did not happen. Okay? The year before that, Malik Willis is solidified. He's a first-round, he's going to be a first-round quarterback. Even the naysayers were like, well, maybe he slips in the second. Malik Willis went in the 3rd. Like, it was definitely not a first-round talent. Year before that, we argued right up until the deadline, right? Draft week, is it going to be Trey Lance or Mac Jones? And there were a lot of people who were still saying the Niners are taking Mac Jones. That didn't happen. So to everyone who's sitting here now in late March going, oh my God, J.J. McCarthy's going to be number 2. Oh my God, the Commanders are going to pass on Drake May and they're going to pass on Daniels. And oh my God, the Patriots are going to do the same thing. They're going to, what if they take J.J.? We're in late March. Relax, okay? Very little of what you think is real right now is real. The personal visits are just now starting for quarterbacks. Those absolutely shape the process, okay? Owners, by the way, start to get involved. Owners start to have dinners with these quarterbacks and form opinions about what they thought of these guys. A lot changes between now and then. And by the way, the last 3 years, it's not like those are the only examples of quarterbacks that we thought for sure were going to places. Everybody knows the Aaron Rodgers 49ers, okey doke that we saw, right? I remember the year Brady Quinn came out, right? Miami was taking him at 7. He was absolutely going to be a Miami Dolphin. They took Ted Ginn, and this happens every single year or every other year with quarterbacks that we're sure they're going to go there, here, whatever. And then draft day comes and we all run around going, oh my God, what happened? Why did he fall? They didn't fall. They were never going to be there in the first place. We're the ones that are wrong. The teams aren't wrong.
But let me piece this together real quick, though, C-Rob, because let's go back to some of those names you mentioned. Trey Lance sucks. Mac Jones sucks. Brady Quinn sucked. Like, Will Levis, the book's still out on. Malik Willis sucks. Like, when these guys are propped up and then don't add up to be good quarterbacks, most of them suck. It's hard for me to find a path for J.J. McCarthy to suck. It's just, I'm listening to you talk, and that's the through line that everybody you're mentioning that we've, bloated the value on has turned out to be a really bad quarterback in the world of the NFL. Spare Will Levis, we don't have the evidence on it yet. Like, it might take a year or two to figure out he sucks. I still think he's going to suck. So, that's the interesting part of this, is that I have a hard time believing McCarthy sucks. I just can't, hell if I know. I'm stuck on it.
Well, I think it's also interesting. I think what people kept talking about this week at owners meetings was the neck up. Like, I had an exec tell me the more you get like from high school to college, college to NFL, every time you take that next step, the neck up becomes increasingly important. Not that you don't need to be athletic and physically able to do what you're going to do, but everyone will be. So you're not like the relative talent you have to other people, the gap continues to shrink because everyone is at the highest level. So what can you do from the neck up? And that's obviously one of McCarthy's calling cards. And so I think that that is definitely helping him. But I still think it's sort of like, it's all projections here. And it's also, is he going to a team where he's going to have the support for what he can do? Or is he going to a team where he doesn't have the offensive line, doesn't have the coaches? Like, I think so many of the factors around quarterbacks are at least as relevant to whether they succeed as the quarterback themselves.
I asked the GM yesterday, who are you putting your money on? Like after our whole long conversation, I'm like, just brass tacks it for me. Like, who are you putting your money on? And he was like, who's going to Minnesota? Like, he's like, right. That's the, like, you're going in with an offensive coordinator or an offensive minded head coach who's been effectively an offensive coordinator. Like, when he was with the Rams, like everybody looks at Sean McVay as being the guy who was calling the offense there, right? But there's no doubt Kevin O'Connell had a really big hand in that. And Sean definitely revealed that as O'Connell was going out the door to the Vikings. So we saw what he was able to do with Kirk Cousins, right? When Kirk Cousins tore his Achilles, O'Connell had gotten Cousins to the point where he arguably was playing the best football of his life. The surrounding pieces in terms of what's available, you have a tight end, you have two very legitimate wide receivers, running back, you figure that out on the fly. I don't think anybody's freaking out about the running back position. There's just an element of setup there for success. And by the way, you have a bridge quarterback in place. So let's say it's a J.J. McCarthy who goes there, right? You have the bridge quarterback in place. He doesn't have to go out there and start right away. Let's say it's Drake May who ends up there. Not only do you have all those other factors, he has a relationship with Josh McCown, right? So there's another setup there that makes a lot of sense. It's the landing spot here matters. And I think the fact that the top three picks are all defensive-minded head coaches could potentially be a negative for all the quarterbacks taken in the top three picks because, again, you're dealing with a defensive-minded head coach. You have an OC. If there's a level of success, it becomes Josh Allen and Brian Daboll. How long before that OC goes out the door? Right. Or how well does the head coach work with the OC? How well does the OC work with the quarterback? Three guys that are all unfamiliar with each other. I see why Minnesota, to me, when you talk to personnel people, why that's the enticing landing spot, because it seems to have the best setup for success and also a certain element of patience in year one as well.
Well, and I also think like Washington is so interesting because I don't think Cliff Kingsbury is going to single-handedly pick who the quarterback is.
Not at
but
all,
I
right.
do think that head coach Dan Quinn and general manager Adam Peters are going to weigh very heavily what Cliff thinks. And something I keep hearing, I'm working on this story on quarterback evaluations and how they've evolved over the last like 10, 15, even 20 years since everyone I asked got into the league until now. And a really big thing is like 15 years ago, you're like, this is what my coach does, and this is the guy I'm going to bring in because he's what my coach does. Now, coaches are way more willing to say, this is my guy's superpowers. Here are his strengths. I'm going to build around those. Here's how my scheme is going to make up for some of his deficiencies. Here's how I'm going to accentuate some of the skills that maybe 15 years ago they weren't willing to accentuate, whether that's actual running, whether that's scrambling, but more using the run to set up the pass, like all of these different things. Sometimes it's something from the way that they're reading the field. And so it'll be really interesting to see because I don't expect us to have like no one's going to be exactly like Kyler Murray. They're also probably all going to be taller than him to start, which does impact the way that you run the game, and no one's going to have his exact physical gifts. And so I think like in Washington, while I totally agree with you, it's hard when you have a defensive head coach because then you risk losing your play caller. And that's arguably one of the most valuable assets a guy can have to his success. I do think that like seeing how Cliff and this new quarterback work together is going to be crucial.
Washington, Adam Peters is the general manager there. And this was a point that I brought up in this story that I wrote about McCarthy. Peters was in San Francisco, right? He was there when they went to the Super Bowl twice. The two quarterbacks that took the 49ers to the Super Bowl were Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy. The one quarterback that stuck out like a sore thumb in the time that Peters was there as a monumental failure was who? Trey Lance. If you're Adam Peters, you're sitting there and you're looking at these top four quarterbacks, right? Caleb Williams down through J.J. McCarthy. Who most resembles the quarterbacks that you watched take the franchise to a Super Bowl. It's
Right,
McCarthy,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, no,
Does
I
McCarthy
texted
not?
you after. So C-Rob like has so many nuggets that like even the end of his story, like you always need to read to the end because if not, you miss some of the great nuggets he got. And like 49ers, I think were like the second and third to last paragraphs of your story. And I texted you and I got there and I was like, yes, yeah, like this is really interesting. I think what's difficult
I should send it to you so you can tell me to move stuff up. You're like, hey, move this over the top of the story.
It's okay. Also, like you don't tweet your stories. That's a whole other thing. So I have to tweet them for you. Anyway, I think that's what's hard is that yes, Brock Purdy worked, but if the 49ers had to go back and do it again, would they pick him in a top 5 pick? They got him in the last pick of the draft. It's not like they believed in him enough even to get him in the second or third or fourth round. And so for sure they're happy now. And
okay,
I know you agree with me on this point.
Okay, go ahead.
No, wait, let me say it. The Washington cast compared to the San Francisco cast, and quite frankly, the Washington offensive coach. I mean, it's not an insult to Cliff to say he's not Kyle Shanahan. Like, who are you setting him up with? So if you're going to give this premier pick that will then hurt your ability to build around him, it's easier to do that when you're taking Brock Purdy where you took Brock Purdy.
But to answer the Purdy question, and I was talking to Kyle Shanahan last summer about Purdy, and he talked about going back and looking at, I think he said he went back to look at some Clemson players, and he ended up watching Iowa State playing Clemson. And all of a sudden he's looking at Purdy and he was like, I'm kind of seeing some things here that we might have missed, that maybe we should have drafted this guy a lot higher than where we did. Now, of course, he's saying that knowing that Purdy had success on the NFL level. Now, remember, this was before the 2023 season. So it was still during a time where we're like, was 2022 a fluke? Like, was that really real? Purdy showed us it was real in 2023. But Shanahan did say, in hindsight, when I looked at tape and I saw what he was doing against high-level players at Clemson, maybe we should have looked at him and said, this guy deserves to be a higher pick than really he ultimately was. And we should have seen it, and we didn't. So I would say that Peters probably walks away with that, right?
Even 2 years in, and even after taking them to a Super Bowl, are you sure that the 49ers are going to extend Brock when the time comes? Because I completely think he deserves it. I completely think that what he's able to do with their offense is really powerful and that it's hard to find a quarterback, and he is a great quarterback. But when I just think about like Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, like the two of them have such high standards. They're so specific. There's a little bit of a what have you done for me lately? Like, are you positive that depending on how this year goes, Kyle's going to be like, in 2025, yes, pay him $50 million?
No, because Kyle and Sean both did the same thing. They both bailed on quarterbacks that took them to the Super Bowl.
That's what I'm saying. If the guy's bailed on quarterbacks in the past, I can't trust him to not do it again. He might not, but he might.
What's the open market? Because this is part of our crystal ball, to skip ahead here. But with Purdy, what would the open market dictate for Brock Purdy? If he hit the open market tomorrow, would anybody in the league be comfortable paying him $40+ million a year?
Hell yes. Oh, God. Yeah, because you know why? The Shanahan offense is proliferated. The Shanahan/McVay offense, like whatever version of it you want to talk about, it's continuing to proliferate throughout the NFL. So there are more teams running it, number one. Number two, there's always someone desperate for a quarterback, right? Kirk Cousins' entire bankroll, okay? How many zeros are in Kirk Cousins' bank account because he found two teams that were not Washington that were desperate for a quarterback. So it's I would say it would be the same. Now, again, let's see Purdy do what Kirk did and again continue to prove it. Washington was like, yeah, we're not doing this. Kirk proved it the next year. We're not doing this. Kirk proved it again the next year. There's going to be a market for him, just like there would be a market for Dak. Obviously, there's going to talk about different levels of talent or abilities or whatever. But if he's a successful starter, absolutely, there's someone out there that's going to be willing to pay him. Look, no knock on Baker Mayfield, right? No knock on him. Like he bet on himself, and look, he cashed in. You're going to tell me you're going to pay Baker Mayfield? We're not going to pay Brock Purdy if Brock Purdy gets the open market? Come on.
So looking in the crystal ball, do you think Brock Purdy gets an extension with the San Francisco 49ers?
I do.
Jori?
I think he will, but I think one, I don't know that he's going to get it early versus when his contract is actually up.
I agree.
And two, I don't think he has already confirmed he's going to get. Now, to be clear, I think he has already confirmed he deserves it. So this is not a knock on Brock Purdy. This is I don't trust Kyle Shanahan to be like, I want to do something else.
Okay, so then let's go back to the McCarthy conversation quickly because we didn't have the chance to get that. McCarthy was plus 2,500 on BetMGM to be the second pick on Monday. By Tuesday, he was plus 800. That's a massive shift in the lines, telling you that Vegas believes there is momentum for McCarthy to be the second pick. Looking in your crystal ball, McCarthy to Washington, second pick overall. Right now, I know it's the draft. A million things can change. But C-Rob, right now, if you look in the crystal ball, you buy in J.J. to Washington.
I'm not.
Okay.
I don't. And only because that's not my opinion. I feel like for the most part, when you talk to people in the personnel community, they're not buying it. They think it's possible. There are certain individuals who definitely think it's possible. But I think when they sit down and they look at the talent of a Drake May, granted with the warts, and we got to get to that red flag conversation about these quarterbacks. And then also, look at Jaden Daniels and wonky elbow to the side. He's an elite level athlete. He's a great passer. There's some issues here and there where, there's tape of him throwing the middle of the field. Are you sure that he wants to do that, can do that on a consistent basis? Yeah, he gets dump trucked sometimes when he runs the football and gets completely destroyed. Yes, there was really only 1 year of super elite success, and it also came with two superstar wide receivers that are going to be first round picks surrounding him. And again, this is late March. Talent typically wins out in these situations. And I think the ceiling is so considerably high with Drake May, and the floor seems fairly high for Jaden Daniels, that you really have to project McCarthy out like a significant amount to see him reaching the level of, but again, it goes to what do they want at 2? That's the question. It's what flavor do they want? I think it's possible. I do not personally think it happens. And one last thing that I should mention here, a lot of personnel people think that Jim Harbaugh has something to do with this. There's a strong level of Jim Harbaugh suspicion here because, as one guy put it, basically every time Jim sits down, he's like, how great J.J. McCarthy is.
It's the stupidest thing in the world. Do we listen to it, man? Because he's got no skin in this game. He can say whatever he wants about J.J. because he's got a quarterback.
The crazy thing is the skin in the game is it benefits him every time somebody moves up ahead of the 5th pick and it's a quarterback, which a multitude of people pointed out. They're like, every time Jim opens his mouth, he's facilitating a narrative of 4 quarterbacks packing up into the top 4 picks. And now your Jim sitting there going, hey, we're at number 5 and we literally have anything you want. The dealership is open. You want a sports car? We got it. You want the luxury SUV? We got it. You want anything you want. Now, not only can they take that, he can also look outward and at every other team and go, hey, which this also plays into him talking the offensive line quote that he had that was from the combine where he talked about it's there's an oversimplification here, but where he basically said the offensive line is like the one unit to be great only has to rely on itself. It does not have to rely on any other position on the field. And it's the only unit on an NFL football field that doesn't rely on anybody else to be great. Whereas every other unit on the NFL or on a field relies on a multitude of different positions to be great. I mean, if you're the Titans, you're going we really were thinking Joe Alt was going to be there for us at 7. Is this Jim putting the for sale sign out in the front yard to the Titans saying, hey, know you want that left tackle. And guess what? We're only 2 picks in front of you. You just got to scoot up a little and you get whoever you want. There is a strong suspicion of amongst the personnel community, or at least the number of GMs, scouts, everybody I talked to yesterday, where they're like, Jim is playing it right now. He is playing the game when he sits down and opens his mouth and talks about things. It feels like a guy who is screwing with other teams and kind of saying like, hey, don't just assume. the best tackle is going to get to you, or the best wide receiver is going to get to you, or this player or that player. We're sitting at 5. We now control the draft because we're going to get 4 quarterbacks in that top 4.
Yeah, it was funny. I was talking to my dad from owners meetings one of the nights, and I said something about he was telling me he watched the new Patriots, whatever docu-series. Yeah. And I said something about, he mentioned the McCourtys, and I told him I'd been with Devin McCourty the previous night. And he was like, well, how do you know it's not Jason McCourty? And I'm like, well, he said his name was Devin, and he kept talking about J-Mac. And my dad goes, twins do that all the time. How do you know they're not lying? And I go, Dad, this is pre-draft season. A lot of people here are lying. Like, if this is 2 truths and a lie, like owners meetings is 2 truths and 70 lies. I think one of the 2 truths is that was Devin McCourty. Like, I don't believe most of what I hear this week, but I believe that was Devin. But all that's to say is, like, everyone's playing these games. And I think 2 things are true about the Commanders. 1, I don't think they're going to pick J.J. McCarthy. 2, I don't think they've yet eliminated the possibility 100% of taking J.J. McCarthy. One of the best lines in C-Rob's piece this week was, all of this despite being an entire month away from the draft, which is still an eternity when it comes to solidifying boards. Like, I get the Vegas odds. I don't think they're apropos of nothing, but I also think that so much can change, including the Vegas odds, including the draft boards. And if you are Dan Quinn and Adam Peters running the Commanders, well, yesterday you were at LSU looking at Jaden Daniels. Today you're going to UNC to look at Drake May. And so for you to say, like, oh, I'm taking McCarthy when I haven't even gone to the pro days, had dinner with these guys, brought them in for 30 visits, had them sit down with everyone, like, no one is making final decisions yet. You might have a leaning, but it would be irresponsible, if not negligent, for the Commanders to have already decided we are taking J.J. McCarthy.
One thing we should really remember about this process, and it was amazing when it happened last year, a dude went on Reddit and said, Will Levis is telling his family the Panthers are taking him at number 1. And his odds shot up the board from 50 to 1 to be the first overall pick to 4 to 1 in a matter of 2 days, because some went on Reddit and said that Will Levis is telling his family he's going to be, with no proof whatsoever. And yet the odds changed. Come on, man. Sometimes those odds change because someone just says something. So when Tom Pelissero comes out and says, hey, at the owners' meetings, there's a lot of attraction, Washington Commanders, McCarthy number 2, the odds change because they're like, hey, wait a minute. Now everybody's talking about it, and boom, 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 it's popping up everywhere. And now people like me are asking, other GMs, like, hey, is this, do you think this could be real? And they're saying, some are saying, yeah, here's the reasons why. Here's the things to like about them. And everybody wants something different, blah, blah, blah. Unlike football games that get played in season, I think odds in the offseason shift based on what the rumor mill is. Whereas I think in season, game odds shift based on really hard criteria or actual things they are mining from inside the franchises. I don't know how many people are really mining things amongst the odds makers inside franchises. Are the Commanders talking, okay, so here's what the draft meeting was like today, and here's what dinner was like with J.J. McCarthy. I don't know that's really happening.
Yeah, we live in a world where nobody wants to trust anybody that's actually a reporter, news media, or any of that, but they want to trust everybody that has a conspiracy theory that matches theirs. I'm just saying that was fact.
Amazing. Right.
That's well put.
So
sad, but well put.
I mean, it's just real. So C-Rob, you've mentioned a couple of times red flags. So let's get to it, because this is peek behind the curtain. We're sitting down. We're getting ready to start recording. And C-Rob says, this quarterback class is insane. And I just lay back and I'm listening. I'm thinking, okay, he's right. Everybody keeps telling me that we could see 5 or 6 quarterbacks go in the first half of the draft, but definitely 5. Keep hearing over and over. I think he means insane in a good way. And then C-Rob, you say insane because all of these guys have red flags. Go on.
Okay. At the combine, I get there early on. All of a sudden, what was the first thing I start sharing with you guys? I share with, our NFL editor, Nate Tice. I'm hearing a lot of people saying negative stuff about Drake May all of a sudden. There's a lot of people killing his tape, saying he's far more erratic down the field than people want to recognize, that his ball placement's not great. Just starting to really pick apart the film and what they saw as a regression from 2022 to 2023. So there's okay, here's this red flag. There's a regression from one year to the next with this guy where he looks a lot more erratic. And someone even he's look, it's not on the level of Will Levis, where he went from superb tape to the next year, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, this is concerning, these interceptions, like all these different things he's doing. But there was sort of a hint of that with Drake May and how people were looking at the assessment. So I'm like, okay, there's already some tape red flags now starting to pop up between 2022 and 2023 on Drake May. McCarthy, the red flags are the red flags. It's, okay, some guys say there's just not enough tape out there. Other guys say, hey, look at some of the throws that he's made that showed up in the touchdown box. Those were he had some interception luck on some of these plays. What's his size? Oh, he's a huge of the class. He's the biggest projection guy. You're really projecting where he can be. And it's always dangerous when you are picking quarterbacks in the top 2 or 3 or 4 picks, and you're doing it based on here's where we're projecting him out to, not necessarily what we're already seeing. So you have that. Jaden Daniels goes through his pro day, and then it's like, hey, a weird Getty picture that we've never seen before of his elbow pops up, and now there's this talk about like, oh, is there's some deal with his elbow now, and there's concerns about, he has Lamar Jackson running skills, but he doesn't have Lamar Jackson avoidance. The guy gets absolutely destroyed. Oh, he might have played in the 190s when he was at LSU. Oh, he's only got 1 year of super elite play, and it happened to come with 2 wide receivers in Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors who look amazing, and Malik Neighbors who might end up being the number 1 wide receiver in this draft. So there's that. And then now Caleb Williams. That is really, in my mind, what brought up the red flag aspect. We've already kind of talked about the quote unquote potential red flags with Caleb, but I'm on the phone yesterday, right? A GM says to me, he's like, why is he responding to someone on Twitter who's making fun of his pink phone? Like, what the hell? Why is he doing that? Like, why is he even on Twitter right now? Like, what is the point of being on social media? And, oh, by the way, if that bothers him, that someone sees him holding a pink phone and says, pink phone, basically says, not going to lie, pink phone, like makes a comment about it. And he feels like he has to then respond to that person, which he did. That's not great. You're going to be criticized. You're going to Chicago, right? And fans are going to kill you on social media when you're bad. And by the way, the media there it's not going to be a lot of flowers, okay? It's not going to be a lot of parades, a lot of great things said about you if you're not producing and you struggle in Chicago. So it's just on top of the other things that I think people are worried about with Caleb Williams, about the out of structure play and some of the things that he says publicly, kind of does he kind of have some Kyler Murray attributes to him in terms of, how he looks at himself and his importance. Now it's this talking to people on social media who really, in the grand scheme of things, should mean nothing to him. And this guy said, like, if he is really that sensitive that he has to respond to that on social media, that makes me nervous that when you get into the season and things are going really, really badly, and he has a game where he throws 4 interceptions and is doing some wild stuff, and he's getting absolutely drilled on social media, are you going to be praying like, hey, man, please don't do this. Don't start engaging with people who do not matter in your sphere. Do not start engaging with those people on social media, because that's just a whole other level of distraction you never want with a quarterback.
Incredibly well said and incredibly scary, because like realistically, this is something we've talked a lot about on the show. It feels like everybody thinks that their savior for their franchise is the quarterback in this draft. Whatever quarterback they get, I don't care which one we're talking about. This guy is going to save us, and suddenly we're going to be able to compete with Mahomes. And when you point it out that way, like in 5 years, we're either going to look back at this draft and say, well, of course, we all thought it was going to be perfect. Or we're going to look back at this draft and say, okay, this is the stupidest thing in the world that everybody reached this hard for these guys. Like, it is wild how everybody's presuming everything's going to be perfect.
And Jori, I won't say who it was, but Jori, the other day, we're having a conversation where she's like, there is a prominent player, who if I say something on social media, 100% this player is going to come back at me on social media if I say something. And we know, like, it's a real thing. And if we know, the teams know. And it's not great. It's just not when you know you have a superstar level player who is willing to be bothered by what somebody says, whether it's a reporter or anybody else on social media, especially when it's a quarterback.
How many times do we see teams not take someone because of that? Now, again, I think you have to
Fair.
consider one,
Fair.
like Cowboys quarterback. You can't have a Cowboys quarterback doing, there's just too much spotlight. Like when you look at how often Dak is on ESPN in the middle of March when nothing's happening, like it's ridiculous. And I think that even in New York, like I was there when Giants team owner John Mara was talking this week and Giants GM Joe Shane, and they were talking about like, I mean, Daniel Jones is still the presumed starter this year, but when they take someone for that New York market, they consider, can you handle the landscape? I also think that we were talking a few months ago on the same podcast about Justin Fields unfollowing the Bears. And I remember saying then, like, do I think it was necessary? No. Do I think that versus saying something is better? Yes. But I think unless you're like, I don't know, honestly, it's really just how talented you are. Like guys have done such ridiculous things that are way worse than responding on social media, like illegal things, violent things, like highly concerning character things. Like, and again,
I'm not saying you wouldn't.
We need to relitigate Tyreek Hill. He's still on a team and he's still one of the most valued receivers in the NFL, if not the most valued receiver in the NFL.
Jori, I'm not saying he wouldn't get drafted because of it.
Yeah.
I'm saying for a team, you're sitting there and it's now beginning, and I think it's going to get exponentially more interesting in the years as we move on. I am hearing more and more teams than ever talk about Gen Z NIL. Gen Z NIL.
Yeah.
These guys are different. These guys, and you see it from the decision-making standpoint, they're sitting there going, well, this doesn't look right to me. Is it a me problem or is it a them problem? Is it me not understanding that, hey, generationally, players change, human beings change, and so I have to change to understand how to deal with the differences? Or is it legitimately it's a generation that now is going to absolutely put everything out there on social media, be upset about it or reactive to it, and you know, is there going to be a level of focus with players that now is some way shaped by the NIL money they got, that is some way going to be shaped by how much they live their life in their own stage and spotlight on social media constantly. And then in terms of those factors, are they going to create barriers? Are we going to have guys who come in with NIL money going, I'm already professional. I don't have to try out. I don't have to do this. I don't have to do that. I'm not going to play special teams. Like I've already made millions of dollars or, you know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars coming in. So I kind of feel professionalized on my way in. So I don't necessarily have to, you're drafting a pro. I don't have to prove that I'm a pro. And then, you know, in terms of the generational aspects of it, how much energy are you focusing on things that in the past you didn't have to worry about? Like how often is my quarterback's head in the wrong headspace because someone pissed him off on Twitter making fun of whatever it is.
Which, to be clear, I talked with multiple like top front office people this week who said, again, obviously you need to be athletic, have the on-field talent, but they do care and weigh more prominently intangibles and a person's like personal makeup, character, all of that for quarterbacks than others. Because it's the same idea when I've talked to GMs about, they're like, hey, I might think something, but if I say it publicly, I represent the franchise. Quarterback is the same way. A quarterback represents the franchise and represents the locker room and takes the pulse of the locker room and sets the temperature of the locker room in a way that a safety doesn't, a linebacker doesn't, a running back and receiver do not.
And I will just say quickly, to me, it's a little bit like wins above replacement. If you've got two quarterbacks that are even on your board and one of them you're off put by some of these things, that becomes the tiebreaker on it. No doubt the talent separates. We do have to, before we get off before we wrap up, Dak is a big part of this conversation too. I want to make sure we get to it. Terry Jones said at the owner meetings, we are where we are, locked and loaded for this year. Everybody seems to be really concerned about the fact that there's not a long-term deal for Dak in place. Jori, you were down there. I know you looked at this a lot. What's your sense around what's going on with the Cowboys and Dak?
Yeah, I think what's crazy is we have seen the Cowboys do this before with a lot of players, including Dak. They let him hit the franchise tag. They let him play out that year on tag. We were on the cusp of a second tag year with free agency when they got that deal done, which, by the way, he got 4 years, $160, which he's pretty much going to make. I also think that this is still even more dangerous what they're doing now, because at that point they could franchise tag him. Now, it was going to be expensive, not as expensive as the $59 million cap that he's going to take this year, but it was going to be expensive, but they still had the control. They do not have the control after this season. Like, I don't know that everybody realizes that for sure, like the rabid Cowboys fans, but I don't know if all NFL fans realize Dak has in his contract, no tag, no trade. He cannot be tagged again. They cannot say you have to play for us in 2025. They can pay him $1 gazillion, but it's not a matter of getting the negotiation done or him holding out. He can leave. Now, does he want to leave? He'll have to decide that. He'll have to decide like, okay, 2024, what does my offensive line look like? What does my coaching staff look like? Am I where I want to be? Like, how am I weighing all of these things? But if you want to think about whether he could leave, I think you should look at what Kirk Cousins just did. Kirk Cousins had a great play caller in Kevin O'Connell. Kirk Cousins had a great receiver in Justin Jefferson, great defense supporting him. His family liked Minnesota. I know his wife has family in the Atlanta area, but there were a lot of reasons why Kirk Cousins, it would have been very easy and not like just mailing it in. Like, he wouldn't have been settling if he stayed in Minnesota, but he said, I want the money. I want a contract that reflects what I can do. And not only do I want the guarantees for the financial purposes, I want the guarantees because the more a team is committed to guaranteeing you money for multiple years, the more they are committed to starting you for multiple years. And these are competitive guys. Like, I look at Russell Wilson and I say, yeah, obviously it makes sense that he's playing for the veteran minimum because, one, any team will pretty much sign him for $1.2 million. And two, then he can give the Denver Broncos every medicine he wants them to have to take. But they don't have to really start him because, as C-Rob has written about great for the last couple of weeks, like, there's not a whole lot of commitment to a guy you have $1.2 million for 1 year to. Like, guarantees matter. And so I think that this Dak stuff will be really interesting. Now, what I will say is the two reasons you want to get Dak done this offseason is because, one, you want to lock up a guy who I would say is like top 5, top 7 quarterback in the league. And it's really, really hard to find those. And two, because then you can move his cap hit to later years. He's not as expensive and you can go sign other people. That second reason is out the door now. The bulk of like the top free agents are not there anymore. And so you don't need that money. And so, yes, you could say, they could get a deal done in April. They could get a deal done in June. They could get a deal done during training camp, maybe even during the season. Although, one, Dak in the past didn't want to negotiate during the season. And two, if your whole thing is the playoffs, which we can get into that and I'll stop talking in a minute, like that, you won't have that new data point there. But I think that the Cowboys kind of realize how much leverage he has. They would be making, they know if they sign him to a deal now, they're going to have to pay him a ton because he has so much leverage and he knows he'll probably have even more leverage next year. So it's kind of this like weird chicken and egg game.
And it's funny too, when you talk about Kirk saying, I want the guarantees, I want this, I want that. He didn't have to go to a team to get it. He went to a good situation in Atlanta.
Pick your team.
You can pick your team. And here's the very problematic thing for Dallas. They just flew the flag for Dak. Every team that's sitting there going, okay, this could affect our quarterback plans in 2024 because we know, hey, if we strike out, if I'm Sean Payton and I'm sitting there going, yeah, didn't have the ammunition to move up. Don't really like the quarterbacks we're going to have. Let's rock it with Jarrett Stidham for a year and then let's go pay Dak in 2025. And our team will be pretty good at that point. We'll be in a pretty good situation. And I like what Dak brings to the table. That you're basically just telling other teams that don't have a super clear path in terms of quarterback in 2024, that just wait a year. Just wait a year. And Dak can be yours. All you got to do is pay him and show him that you're willing to put a good team around him. That's extremely problematic, I think, for the Cowboys. And it's great for the rest of the league, particularly teams that go, hey, we're in a pretty good spot. Pittsburgh, they're like, hey, you know what? Maybe neither of these guys works out. But maybe we decline Fields' fifth-year option, and we have Russ and we have Fields in 2024, and maybe neither of those guys really meets our expectations. Well, you know what? Dak will be there for us, and we can have a pretty good team prepared for him, and he'll come up and he can play in Pittsburgh for Mike Tomlin. And one thing, when all this kind of happened, I thought back to a conversation I had with one of Dak's guys last offseason, and I was like, what's it, because at that time, I thought they were going to get the extension done then. I was like, they're not going to wait. They're not going to push this into, another year. And they, right. And he said to me, he's like, oh, no, we're good. Like, we're good. Like, we're on the same page, blah, blah, blah. We're good. And at the time I thought, oh, okay, so it's going to get done when it needs to get done. Both sides. No, I think what he was saying to me is, we're good whether they do the deal or not. We're fine. We're going to be good. Because if they don't do the deal, eventually Dak gets the free agency and, every option now is open. Sure, he could still go back to the Cowboys for a huge deal then, or he could look out at the landscape and do a Peyton Manning and say, let me go ahead and measure every other team out here and decide what is the best position for me. I think in hindsight, Dak's known he's going to be good all along. I think the people around Dak know he's going to be good all along, as long as there's not an injury. Then he went out in 2023, and I know playoffs, that wasn't great, but he had a great regular season in 2023. I think he showcased what that there's still ceiling there to be had. Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know. I made the joke about the Cowboys 2025 quarterback plans. It's like, Jesus take the wheel, because I'm looking at it and I'm like, I don't know what the plan is. Like, this
Thanks
guy
for
is not the plan.
explaining that to the Jewish girl on the podcast, because I do know the term Jesus take the wheel, but when I looked at that picture, it didn't scream to me Jesus take the wheel, and I was like, what are we talking about here?
It was a statue of Jesus taking the wheel, Jori.
By the way,
I'm not saying I always am the quickest on those type of things. And the Peyton comparison is a really good one, because I don't think that Dak and Peyton are the same quarterback, like not by style, not by talent, blah, blah, blah. But they're both among the best quarterbacks in the league at the time that they're playing, particularly in terms of the ones that become available. And Jori actually had a quote to us this week where he said, I think there are a handful of quarterbacks who are playing in the league right now who have not yet won a Super Bowl and will. And I think Dak is in that category. And I think when you look at it that way, it's like, how could he leave? Well, you're right. Peyton did leave. And even, I think the biggest reason you would not want to do this if you're an agent, if you're Dak, is to guarantee you security for the future. Well, first of all, that's more relevant to your first contract. Dak already got $140 million. Like, he has that money in the bank. He's got the endorsements. He's the Cowboys quarterback. He'll be set for life. But also, when he got his last $140 million contract, months removed from the bone in his ankle, like breaking through the leg, and he wasn't even done with the rehab process, and they paid him. And when Kirk Cousins got $100 million guaranteed as he's rehabbing from his tear. So I don't even, unless, I'll like knock on all types of wood here. I don't want there to be any injury for any player this season. That would be my dream. But as long as he can still play, and even if he maybe can still play, it's probably not going to really deter teams, because we've now seen with Dak and Kirk, who are the ones who have most been in this situation, both of them got paid, not just once they came back when they had in the past, before their rehab was complete.
And they got paid by one got paid by his team, another one got paid by a different team. So it happened in both ways.
That's the QB desperation we have in this league.
See, Rob, as you were talking, all I kept thinking, and you mentioned the Broncos, is if my beloved Raiders go into the season, Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew, and that doesn't work out, you can't tell me Mark Davis wouldn't outbid the Broncos, whatever it takes to make sure that, like, that's the very real two teams in one division will just be competing for an MVP caliber quarterback. Like, that's just, he's going to make so much money. It's gross.
Fitz, there could be a team that we don't perceive right now, a problem coming, right? Like when Goff and McVay parted ways, prior to that season, we didn't perceive that really potentially happening. And then it happened, and McVay was like, this guy is not moving in the right direction with me. He's not growing with my offense. I need to go get Matt Stafford. And so they went and they got Matt Stafford. There could be another team in the middle of 2024 with a quarterback that we presume going into the season is safe, secure, the future, whatever. And the team's like, maybe not. Like, maybe we need to saw more and more. We are seeing teams willing to make that change. This is a really big story, and it's a really big story for a lot of NFL teams that are sitting there going, we could potentially get a guy and plug him in the middle of a really good situation and elongate our Super Bowl window. All we got to do is wait.
With the caveat that I don't think the Broncos are going to be in a really good situation in 1, 2, or probably even 3 years, how much can you see Sean Payton like trading up for a quarterback this year and going after Dak in like 10 months? Because like I can 1,000% see that. But when people ask me like, where do you think he should go? Through me, I'm like, I'm biased. He was my favorite player to ever cover. He remains my favorite player to ever cover. I live in New York, so like send him to the Jets or Giants. Like the closer, the better.
Oh, God, I don't need that. All right, we're supposed to end the show here, and so I'm just going to make Stone's life difficult because I think I should have asked you guys something we didn't ask you. So I'm going to keep you for a couple extra minutes because for all this conversation about quarterbacks, it just had me thinking. You guys both have talked to everybody in the league. Deion blew up this week saying Shedeur and Travis, like there's only a few teams that his kids would play for. I mean, I'm just going to ask, as we've come through all this quarterback conversation.
Say the whole quote, because I live in a vacuum and I've been in owners meetings bubble.
The quote is, I know where I want them to go. So in certain cities, that ain't going to happen. It's going to be an Eli. So the question is, like, and we're talking about Shedeur. He's got 2 kids that could be first rounders next year. And Shedeur certainly thinks he should be the top quarterback taken long way before we worry about next year. But I've heard ESPN all week screaming that this is the future of the NFL, where players have agency and they're just not going to accept the draft system. From everything you guys have seen from the teams you talk to, like, is there some concern that Deion is going to change the future of the NFL drafting process?
Oh, it wasn't the question I thought you were going to ask. I thought you were going to say, does this end with Dak out of Dallas and Shedeur Sanders being the Cowboys quarterback?
I had someone mention that on the phone to me. Let's just say, being like, what is this ridiculous, whatever. I will also say, like, didn't we have Caleb Williams forcing his way out of Chicago in the headlines a year ago? Like, things change. I know it's like, not to burst everyone's bubble, and like, it's great to talk about, but just because they're saying it now doesn't mean they're going to stick to it.
No, but I think because you're right. And look, before that, it was Joe Burrow should force the Bengals not to draft him, and Trevor Lawrence should force the Jags. Like, we do this every year, and it's stupid. Do you believe that there is a place and time coming where players will simply, you mentioned NIL players, where players are going to simply turn around and say, no, I'm not doing that, and I don't want to be part of this?
Look, we're crawling. Don't you feel like we're crawling toward that? I mean, it's now, granted, people have sat out the combine process before. That has happened, right? Marvin Harrison sat out everything. Like, I'm preparing for the 2024 season. And now, granted, I absolutely 100% there are people in the personnel community who say, I understand the logic of it. Literally another conversation I was having with Scout yesterday. He said he didn't want to give people something to punch holes in. Because we were kind of talking about Neighbors, and the day Neighbors had, obviously at LSU, he looked amazing. And, so there's some sensibility to it. But again, it was still pretty wild for him to just say, yeah, I'm not doing anything. Now, that's a wide receiver. Who's to say a quarterback who has put exquisite levels of tape up, right? Like, and let's say it's a Marvin Harrison Jr. type situation where you get a quarterback who starts as a freshman, sophomore, junior, comes out, has all this tape in the world and goes, not doing nothing, not throwing, I'm not doing it. You got all my tape. I'll do the measurements for you, and I'll go and I'll visit you. I'll do personal visits, but you have all my tape. I'm not going to do anything else for you. I mean, it's possible. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. has definitely opened up that potential. And the only way that gets stopped or checked is if teams collude and go, okay, the owners they pick up the red phone and they all get on together and they're like, we're not taking this guy. So this guy could be the first pick in the draft. Let's go ahead and let him slide to this first pick in the second round. Let's go ahead and we're all going to agree we're not going to do this. And we're going to make an example.
They'll never do it with each other the other day.
Yeah. There's no way. I mean,
the GM told me the other day, like, we're all friends, but also we want nothing more than to beat one another.
Oh yeah, and there's like, you can't tell me that like Mike Brown isn't going to be sitting there at like the 17th pick and going, screw you guys.
Who's going to try and spearhead the collusion campaign? It's going to be the owner who thinks he can trick everybody else to do it. They're all going to have the whole idea, and he's like, if I get suspended for a few games, but I get the quarterback at 10 when he was going to go at 1, that's worth it. I do think you make a really interesting point, though, of will NIL and this sort of player empowerment ever lead to the players getting any more leverage back from the team owners, which they don't have right now. And I was thinking about it this week in conjunction with the hip drop tackle or the swivel hip drop tackle, however you want to say it, where the players union comes out and they're like, we oppose this. It's too unclear. We're just going to get fined. And then it's like, great, thanks for letting us know. We don't care. We're still going to unanimously approve it. And you guys don't have a vote in this matter. And they just they have so little leverage right now, even though they're trying to slowly work it. It'll be interesting to see if, like right now, the owners have so much leverage for a few reasons, including because they have the money. And as the players increasingly come in with more money, I do wonder whether they will get a little more leverage.
Well, and the thing too, like Fitz, when you bring up this topic, the one thing the NFL Players Union has lacked up until this point was a membership, a full membership that sat there and said, we're going to do the hard thing and erase a season. There's never been a group of players. I wonder, are we getting to an era where there are players who go...
We should team up on a deep dive on this. This would be fascinating.
I'm curious.
How will the next CBA be impacted by NIL?
But we're seeing players who appear to be willing to do some things or push back, or as Fitz said, take agency. That hasn't happened in the past. Maybe the NFLPA 5 years from now or 10 years from now, it's an easier sell to look at the membership and go, we're going to do it. We're going to break them. We're going to erase the season and everybody's getting fully guaranteed contracts. That's what's going to happen. And you're going to be the ones that do it. You're going to be the 2,000 players who change the NFL forever. And maybe generationally, it has changed enough that they finally get a high enough percentage of membership that goes, yep, we're going to go ahead and just not play this year. Unlikely, very unlikely, especially considering where the money is, because you'd have to have some quarterbacks that are going to go, yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and erase that $60 million I'm going to make this year. Probably not going to want to do that. But it's an interesting theory or idea to think of, because the NFLPA has always struggled with getting a membership on collectively on board with erasing large swaths of the regular season.
And I'm certainly not smart enough to be an attorney or part of the CBA process. But if I was the NFL, I would simply make anybody that declares for the draft join the NFLPA the day that they declare for the draft, and then make a bylaw in the CBA that says if you're drafted, you must go to the team you're drafted to. Then it'd be a violation of the CBA if you didn't. I'm not a lawyer. It just seems like there are fixes out there for the rich guys too. I just think it's going to be an interesting battle if we suddenly see it come down. All right, Stone is going to have to edit half this episode to get it into the amount of time. So the stuff that was edited out was absolutely the best we've ever done, and it'll make the bonus edition at some point. Follow us on social media, you know that. And C-Rob, of course, tell everybody how we continue to support the legacy of the great Terez Paylor.
Yeah, check out breakingtea.com/Terez for your all juice tea or hoodie. Remember that the proceeds to purchase that go to the Terez Paylor Scholarship at Howard University. You can also donate to that scholarship directly, as well as the one in his name at Missouri, if you check out our podcast description. And remember, next month we are releasing the 2024 All Juice team. So it's coming up soon.
New hoodies with the new team? Is that the way that works? Are they new?
No, we did the redesign last year, so okay. I don't think we want.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
No, I love the hoodie. I have the hoodie. I love it so much. Didn't know if there was going to be.
I think periodically there will probably be a design update. But since we just did it last year, I think we probably wait a little bit longer for the next version. So.
Well, go out and get the hoodie. It's super soft and amazing. I'm back Monday with Zero Blitz. We're back next Thursday with more inside coverage. Stone, thanks for cutting this down at the amount of time. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us.